Hi everyone, welcome to Mesón Sol, video game show that you can watch every Sunday morning depending on your time zones, of course. It is a show normally hosted in Spanish, but today is a special occasion as we have an interview in English with Zoe Franznick, narrative designer of Pentiment. It already is uploaded for my common audience as part of our big review on Pentiment, but it is in Spanish, and I thought this was an opportunity to separate the interview from the review just once and show the world how we do things here. Though the review will have English subtitles rather soon, not today, but maybe tomorrow, the next one. I hope you enjoy this interview as we talk with Zoe about what is narrative design, how does it work, and her perceptions of life and how worlds should be built under her standards and what she wants to bring into the industry. If you want to hear more from her, she has the Maniculum podcast with a friend, Mac, and they describe it as a bi-weekly podcast where we create TTRPGs from weird medieval texts. I really enjoyed it while editing this show, so I hope you may jump in. If you're watching this and like what Mesón Sol brings to the table as well, I hope you leave a comment about your impressions as this is the first time we do anything like this. Thanks so much for coming by and see ya. Pentiment is a wonderful piece of work, but maybe we should get to that later. First of all, I wanted to ask, the first time you got into the idea of the projects, were you involved from the start, or was it introduced to you after some thoughts by other members of the team?
Oh, great question. Actually, I came onto Pentiment partway through, I would say pretty much halfway through its development. I actually had just finished my master's degree in medieval studies at Trinity College Dublin. So, medieval studies and Pentiment is just a match made in heaven, of course. And I was already looking for roles in game design, narrative design. Which of course my professors thought I was crazy. They're like, "You're not going to do a PhD. You're gonna go and create video games. That's really what you're gonna do." But for me, uh, narrative design and video games are the cutting edge of interesting narrative and interesting story. So I applied to Obsidian, and Josh saw my background in medieval studies, and it turned out to be a perfect match. So I actually came in halfway through the project and onboarded and just hit the ground running.
That's great because although you came when the project already started, it is just like you said, your studies were the perfect match. Have you always been pushed to this kind of studies and then getting into video games, or was it medieval studies first and then discovering what video games may offer in that aspect?
Definitely the latter for me. I was incredibly nerdy as a child. I read a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of weird texts. I actually started Latin in the third grade, so about 10 years old. So I have about 15 years of Latin experience, and kind of was steeped in this very strange classical tradition, reading Socrates, reading Cicero, and then jumping into medieval studies. So I thought that I was going to go straight for that PhD. I was going to be a professor, and I had everything totally sorted. And then 2020 hit, and COVID and quarantine hit, and I took a look at where I was, and I wasn't able to actually move overseas and do my degree as I wanted to. And so I started looking, okay, how can I make ends meet? I probably won't really make it as a novelist, but I love to write. I love to write. I can't give that up, and I need to pursue that. And so I started looking at where I could go with this. And for me, it was video games. I already love TTRPGs, role playing games, things like that. But they're limited in scope simply because you have to play them with a small group of people. And I wanted to make the biggest impact possible because I felt like I had something to say and I wanted to bring these weird medieval stories and the joy that I found in those stories to light. And I said to myself, where can I, one, make the biggest impact possible? And two, where are the coolest stories being told? And for me, that was video games. Because where else can you find that sort of interesting agency where you as a player, where you as a person are making choices that matter and are exploring these vast worlds? And it's, multidimensional, it's auditory, it's visual, it's somatic. And for me, it was a no-brainer. So even though I thought I would have no chance, I said to myself, "I'm gonna make this happen." And, you know, Pentiment was the perfect project.
It's truly an uncommon project, really special for both players and developers, probably. I find it I find the word narrative really special as nowadays there are a lot of videos explaining narrative on many games, so we may lose sight of how it is actually made, though we analyze it as players from the outside. What is the role or what are the duties when you're trying to send your message in media of a narrative designer? What are their tasks?
Ooh, the tasks of a narrative designer. Uh, Pentiment was a very small team, so a lot of what I did was communicating with the other departments. So you would think that my first and foremost job was to write the narrative, which in large part it absolutely is. But for me, the narrative designer role is a little bit bigger than just writing because it's my job to be a spokesperson for the narrative throughout the other departments. So it's my job to communicate with art, with animation, with design and programming to make sure that everything is coming together. And of course, this is a massive team effort, so I wasn't the only one doing this. All of our other departments were also communicating with me. Uh, but essentially, that was my first priority, was making sure that the narrative matches the animation, that it matches the sound design, that it, fits in with all of that because one part can be really good, but if everything else isn't working and if it doesn't sync up correctly, then it's a failure on my part for not communicating that well. So and I think that came together beautifully with Pentiment. It, with the writing sounds, with the dialogue, and the beautiful art style pulled straight from medieval manuscripts. The whole team did a fantastic job. So communication is my first role there. Beyond that, it does get into the writing, scoping out what the conversations look like, where we're going to place checks, because as you go through Pentiment and converse with people, you can get stuck on conversations where somebody might not want to tell you something based on how you treated them previously, or maybe you treated them really well and they're more than willing to give you that information. So we design those conversations, where those checks should be, how to balance those checks. And then additionally working very closely with Josh to make sure the overall arc of the story fits, that we're not missing anything, that the overall story beats fit very well with the individual small conversations that you can have. So, writing is one major part of it, of course, but being a narrative designer is a much, much bigger task because ultimately you're a part of a team and you're working with everyone to make sure you get a beautiful finished product.
So the goal, at first, will be protecting the message you or the team had in mind after it sometimes, gets blurry because of difficulties during development, like it's protecting the ideal message or the ideal world you wanted to deliver in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Protecting that and also adapting it and allowing it to be flexible and change over time. Uh, the worst thing you can do is stick with one idea so much that it destroys the potential of the rest of the game. And you can get great feedback from anybody on any level of the team. So both protecting that core message, absolutely, but also being willing to chisel away at it and sculpt it in such a way and allow for those changes.
It's so cool because that's something we usually forget, but this type of small teams developing projects, is it easier to know the basics of how to not get stuck in this kind of processes for later projects?
Um, that's a tricky question that I don't know that I'm totally capable of answering because Pentiment has been my first major game project. I'm very excited to see what that looks like for me on other games, on games of the same size, bigger games, whatever. Uh, but in terms of production and how that flowed for us, I think for Pentiment, it did very, very well. The team communicated very effectively, and yeah, it ran basically as smoothly as it could.
Coming back to what you wanted to say as a narrative designer or as a team, what were the main facts that were stated during development? What were you told or what were you looking forward to communicate to the players?
For me, and for narrative as a whole, we really wanted to explore themes of art and how art and history create their own narratives. Pentiment is a very narrative focused game, both in the fact that it has a lot of text, but also in that it explores narratives as a whole. And so the big one there is exploring the individual lives of people in Tassing, but also the collective history of the town of Tassing and Curacao at the monastery itself. So, what does that history look like over time, and how do we understand it? How do we interpret it? How do we reinterpret it and interpret that history? Tassing was a pagan town, a Roman town. Now it's a Christian town, and all of those elements are interspersed throughout the game. And so, one of our biggest jobs, and one of my kind of key core points as I was creating those conversations and dialogues was how do different people understand the history of this place? And how does the player then get to approve, reject, challenge, agree with those different perceptions? How can they alter those perceptions? And what does that mean for the overall narrative? And what does that mean for player experience and how they're understanding what Pentiment is? I like to say there's no right or wrong answer in Pentiment, no matter what you do. You can't really lose the game. Uh, but you do get to sit with your choices. You do get to maybe regret a choice that you make when you see the consequences 25 years later. Maybe you're overjoyed at the consequences. And so exploring all of those themes, especially over such a long period of time that the game takes place in, was a core focus for the narrative team.
Oh, that's right. The sense of regret is something I feel too strongly after my first and second playthrough of Pentiment. It was great because how did you manage to not set an absolute truth? Was it important to build a world where the player cannot get an absolute truth? Where people and things happen. A good scene to show it is when Magdalene is painting the whole mural and the different people of Tassin tell her how Andreas was a bad guy, a good guy, how he brought good or disgrace. And no matter how did you effort to be the good one, there's always going to be someone that says, "Man, this guy, nah."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the core tenets of the game, absolutely, because when you're dealing with anything that's historical, and since Pentiment is a work of historical fiction, we did not want to state that there was an absolute truth because there is, what is absolute truth? We can't state that. And so, like there's no winning or losing Pentiment, there's also no clear sense of right and wrong. And uh, in the creation of the game to develop that, we looked at a lot of historical documents to understand all the different perspectives that people had at that time. And so, as you were saying, in those Act Three scenes, you've got people who think about Andreas as a really cool person or as a terrible person who ruined the entire town. And you have to understand that, yeah, we absolutely did that deliberately. And these people were created from a narrative perspective to be multifaceted. They are not paragons of this class or that gender or this ideology, uh, but multifaceted individuals who have their own lives going on in the background. And so rather than you coming in as a big hero or a big villain or whatever, it was more for us a way to explore the consequences of your actions and your choices throughout the game and essentially make the player sit with that as you see these actions, consequences, choices over 25 years. And so pulling on real historical documents influenced us in creating those conversations, exploring other works of fiction like The Name of the Rose, which I see behind you, and just sort of playing with those ideas. We definitely didn't want to give the player the impression that they were winning or losing, but really just exploring what it is to be human in this time period.
It is incredible because you truly see the price of getting into too many people's lives at the same time, like too many feelings, too many people. If you were actually a villager from Tassin, you wouldn't do all of this. But you are Andreas Mala and you're going to solve everything there. Or not. Who knows?
Yep,
I
absolutely.
did my second playthrough just today to refresh some memories, and wow, the ending, how the true evil, though of course it's not like that, but Father Thomas, how he represented sort of those final sentences in The Name of the Rose, where he talks about hiding faith under lies without a smile. I mean, it sounds way cooler in Spanish. It sounds way cooler.
No, no worries. Translating in real time is very difficult. But yeah, yeah, with Father Thomas in particular, he too is a complex character who isn't wholly evil or wholly good. He has complex motivations, just like everybody else in Tassing, just like Hannah, just like Martin, just like Guy, Father Gernot. Like all of these people have their own complex motivations that you get to explore. And Andreas Mahler, as an outsider, we play into players wanting to meddle and wanting to get their fingers in the pie and start playing with that. And because we lean into that, then we get to surprise the player later and say, "Oh, remember when you told that little girl a story? She remembered that, and now she's 25." And we get to play with that and with the player's sense of morality and choice as well.
That kind of moment when you remember making a decision 8 hours ago and said, well, this one maybe I don't really care, but then the character actually be their future, which is now the past based on that, goes straight to the heart because I actually remember making these kind of decisions like Magdalene's book, and they were harder
Hmm.
than the rest of the decisions as the game already taught me things matter. And Pentiment does a really good job teaching the player not too early, but in the right moment that you should be thinking and not playing like this was something you can reload whenever you want, because one of the main mechanics I love from Pentiment is that there's always autosave. Was this a core decision during development? To not allow the player to have many save files in order to get all the endings
Yep.
or restore
Yep.
a situation in order to make the right decision after looking for it on a guide.
Yeah, that was one of our main concerns, both from a narrative standpoint, but also from a design standpoint, because one of the things that we wanted to emphasize, and you can see this in a sort of a difference in narrative compared to, for instance, a lot of RPGs. Instead of having a big question box where you can, circle back to questions and conversations, you don't have that option in Pentiment. It's just you pick your choice and the conversation moves forward. And we wanted that because it's more natural, it provides a lot more flow, but also because you don't get to go back in real life and make quote unquote the correct choice. And so that autosave feature and those conversation choices and that setup was very, very deliberate because we wanted to immerse you very deeply into tassing and essentially make sure that your actions matter and your consequences matter. So it's very cool to hear you say that by Act Two, Act Three, you were understanding, hold on, this is a moment when I need to think because this will matter. And like I said a little bit earlier, we knew going into it that at the start of the game, players won't think about that. They'll say, "Oh, I'll make whatever choice I want to." And so we teach you, no, hold on a minute. This can have influences. So that was very much a deliberate part of the design going into it.
It's great. I remember the first act, how I obtained all the hate from the church, and I was like, maybe I should have given it some thought, just a
Yep.
bit, because I ended up killing two of the monks later on, and it wasn't like I didn't have more
Oh yeah.
proofs, but they were hating me so much I didn't have the tools to talk to them properly in order to get more information. So the only choice I had left was to tell the judge, man, you should kill this guy. I don't know. And thus and that does put at least a bit of grief and regret on the player, because the game low-key says that you played it wrong, so to speak. That is to say, I wanted now to move to something else. I wanted to have an interview with you in particular because I saw something in your website that was most interesting to me. You say you're looking for the everyday divine,
Mm.
and I am not the best in English, but I love that concept. What is your perception of the everyday divine?
Yes. The everyday divine is sort of a concept that I came up with sort of on my own. It's not really a term that I've pulled from anywhere. As far as I know, it might be a subconscious thing. But for me, the everyday divine is looking for the little pieces of magic that exist throughout life, throughout every single day. And for me, I immediately pull this into storytelling. I did my master's degree in folklore and magic in particular, and how magic and story and human experience is all connected and essentially all the same thing. So for me, looking at the everyday divine is really summed up in games like Pentiment, where your choices matter, where you can see all of this come together. And at the end of the day, hopefully at the end of Pentiment, or at the end of a book you're reading, or even at the end of like, a walk through the woods, you come to the end of that and you sit and you reflect and you say, there's something magical, there's something special about this, and I'm a part of this, and I affected that. And so it's the idea that you as an individual also have a little bit of magic. And you can affect the world in that way. And so for me, I like to lean into that. And that comes through most often in my storytelling.
It does. It does a lot. I do truly love that concept as we're always. I do not want to sound like a grumpy old man, but too much technology, too much disconnection while connected. Maybe sometimes we just have to appreciate everything in front of us, just so we can be able to feel that kind of energy that may cheer us up to get through the day in a different way than always looking at our phones. Although I'm always looking at my phone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Even jumping into that, I think technology is a great way to find those moments, to spark those connections. And again, like that's why I got into video game development is in the first place, is that hopefully I can sort of spark that divine spark, so to speak, into people by creating and as they play through games like Pentiment.